Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for this live panel discussion on how to optimize your product team during and post COVID-19. I'm really excited about the panelists that we have come together to talk about this topic. First thing I'm going to do is introduce myself and then introduce our panelists. And then we'll just get down into some of these questions that we have around this topic. So my name is Emily Bana, and I am the Managing Director for ThoughtBot Raleigh-Durham. If you're not familiar with ThoughtBot, we are a product design and development consultancy. We've been around for 17 years, working with startups and high growth companies. And we have offices in Boston, New York, San Francisco, London, Raleigh-Durham, and in Austin. Today, we're going to be talking about this important topic of optimizing your product team. And today, we have Harsh Tapadia from AllStacks. I'll let him introduce himself.
Hey, so I'm Harsh Tapadia. I'm the co-founder and CEO of AllStacks. We're a product that helps you understand when your software is going to be released and why it's not when you hoped it would be.
Great, and we also have Ursula Mead.
Hi, I'm Ursula. I'm the CEO and co-founder of InHerSignt. We are a company ratings platform for women where we help women find companies that are going to support their goals and their needs. And we work with companies to help them support the women who work for them.
Great. And we have Patty Krasowski.
Hi, yeah, I'm Patty. I'm the engineering manager at Growpath. We build software for law firms, mainly personal injury firms, that help the firms manage their caseloads from the time they get a call for an intake all the way through to when they sign the client and carry through to the end of the case.
Great. Some of you might notice that we are actually missing a panelist. Today, our thoughts are with Jeanette, who has lost a family member to COVID this past week. So our thoughts are with her. This topic is more important than ever. When we're talking about optimizing your product team, we cannot eliminate the human factor or the empathy that comes with dealing with human beings. This is not just about creating efficiency, but it's also working with folks in terms of where they are from an emotional point of view. With that being said, I'm going to just dive right into our first question, which is, how are you helping your teams balance work and the pressure and tragedies that are happening with COVID at this time? Herschel, I'll throw that question out to you to get started.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's a really interesting topic for us because with the work we do at AllStacks, we actually did a broad-based study of all of our customers and understood like how their work patterns were changing. And we also took some of that information back and used it to modify how we work with our team internally. So we saw a few trends that were really interesting. So if you think about the time spent commuting, that's obviously gone. And so across the board, we've seen workdays start earlier, as early as like 6 and 7 a.m. for a lot of companies that otherwise maybe would have been time spent in the car or on the train or on the bus. And that was coupled, interestingly, in a lot of cases, especially early on in COVID, with, although the workday started earlier, it kind of lingered. It wasn't necessarily like productive time in the evening, but people were on and they would be responsive because you're dealing with things like, the kind of fallacy here is that we're working from home, right? But we're not just working from home, we're doing everything at home. We're living at home, we're schooling at home, childcare at home, caring for other people at home, which means that it's not a black and white, clean cut thing. You're not doing a 9 to 5. You might pop in, but then run a class for one of your kids, and then have to take your dog for a walk and cook a meal for an aging parent, and then pop it back into work, and that could take you late into the night. And so one of the things we've been encouraging the folks we work with, as well as our team, is you have to force some of those delineations, right? Kind of create the opportunity to turn off. And it's not always easy to do because you have to accommodate all these schedules. So actually recently, one of the things we've done is we've created additional days off, like mandatory days off every month for the rest of the year. And frankly, it's probably something we're going to continue in perpetuity because it's like the weekends are no longer clean anymore, right? You don't have a home life separation. So we've asked all of our employees, I put out a holiday schedule. I said, we're going to tack it on to 3-day weekends where we can. We'll add an extra day off. Otherwise, we're going to just create additional 3-day weekends throughout the year. We asked folks not to be on Slack, not to be working during those times, like actually take the time to recharge. And we also started putting in place policies where we said, like, okay, set your do not disturb hours on your tooling so that you don't get pinged at 10 p.m. Because what happens is that if you're one of the people that has to spread apart your workday and you're working with someone who doesn't have to spread apart the workday, now there's like this asymmetry where you're getting stressed when you have to take care of your kid and the other person's getting stressed when they're trying to sleep, right? Because they feel an obligation to each other. So there's a lot of steps you can take, but I think the key is, as an executive team or a leadership board, you have to also follow these procedures because you're setting the example. So if you say, I'm asking the company to take a day off, you also have to take a day off. If you say, I'm not gonna, at someone in Slack after 9 p.m., you also shouldn't be doing that, and you shouldn't respond. Obviously there's extenuating circumstances, but if you like ingrain that into the culture of your team, you can really make a difference. Yeah. I think the last thing I want to add there is that one thing we have to remember is companies by and large have been fairly successful transitioning to remote, but one of the things that underpins that transition is we're doing it on the backs of the social capital we've built in the relationships that we have in the office if you weren't already a remote first company. And now, knowing that this thing is going to keep going for some indefinite amount of time, and at least through the end of the year, some companies have already announced through summer of next year, they're going to continue to work from home. Some large companies have announced permanent changes to remote policies. New people are going to enter the organization because business will continue, and they don't have that social capital already built up. They don't have those relationships. So you have to kind of fundamentally restructure how you develop relationships in your company in order to accommodate the fact that you have now two cohorts, people who had the history of interacting in person and people who never will.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's great, Hirsch. Some really great points there. Patty, how has, what's been the biggest impact on your product team since the beginning of COVID? You also had an on-site team, prior to the pandemic.
Right. Yeah, we had one employee working remote full-time. And so, and also, being a software company, you're used to having people work from home. So it is different, obviously, because now everything's at home. Everybody's at home, spouses, children, whatnot. The interesting thing for us, one of the things I've learned being at Growpath is that a lot of law firms, like our customers, are not very tech savvy. So even though they're using software, they may be using old, outdated software. They're not used to being out of the office at all. It's very over the shoulder management. I want to see my employees. I want to see what they're doing. And it was a huge struggle for them to go remote. Our software is cloud-based. You can run it from anywhere, but they just were so set in that mindset. So, we did have some instances where we had to try and help our customers understand, okay, call your IT because they don't they don't have IT people sitting around, you know, so it's like, get somebody to help you set up a VPN. You know, here's how we can recommend, you know, working remote, things to look out for. How can you manage your users now that you can't see them? You know, one of the things that ended up getting implemented was just a productivity tool within the application, so they just can kind of see what everybody's been doing, you know, day to day, because they want that hands-on. So it's kind of, it's very different from, you know, managing software people who are just like, oh, I can work from home, it's easy. And these guys are like, oh my God, we don't know how to work from home. So, you know, that was kind of a culture shock. And so for our product people, it was, you know, listening to the issues they were having and trying to help them figure out, hey, here's a new paradigm. We can help you. We're built to do this. You can work from anywhere. So let's help you get started.
That's great, Patty. And Ursula, I'd love your input on this as well. You've had a lot of things going on for you this past spring, and you know, this on top of everything else. Yeah, I'd love to learn, like, you know, what has been the biggest impact for you and your team.
Yeah, so Emily's alluding to growth of our team. We hired a lot of people. Growth of our family. I have a 6-month-old at home, so you know, we're juggling a lot. So there are a lot of things to consider. I want to echo some of the things that Hirsch mentioned. I think one of the biggest things that we've been doing to help our team is being really open and transparent about our own realities. You can't really hide the crying baby, and we make sure that everyone knows that you don't have to, that it's okay to have all of these other demands on your time and your attention. And the way that we can show that is by bringing that life into the conversations when we need to, and making sure that everyone gets increasingly comfortable with the division of attention and really the division of our own labor now that we have to manage. A piece of that for us has been actually increasing the flexibility that we provide. And Hirsch, you talked a little bit about setting more boundaries. And you know, I know for parents in particular, that's even a little bit harder for us, where we, on the one hand, you want to feel like you can set a boundary and say, this is when I'm going to switch off and I'm going to focus on something else. But it turns out that those boundaries just don't necessarily align with any schedules. And so for a number of the folks on our team, that 9 o'clock hour where a lot of people actually turn off is the first time that we've had quiet all day, where we can actually dig in and really be focused and productive in particular ways. So we have, we've tried to sort of dig in more on flexibility and on different work hours and schedules in a way that does encourage people to shut down and turn off when they need to, but also make sure it's okay that if they're working through the night and that's when they want to spend their time, that we give them the ability to do that too. Because again, we all have different needs, and we have different things that are keeping us sane at the moment. So that's something I'd say that one of the biggest changes to our team was, again, onboarding a lot of new employees right as the pandemic was starting. And as a team that is small and relatively sort of close-knit, and we spent a lot of time in small spaces together, this was really the first time that we had encountered that. It's taught us a lot about how we communicate and how you can actually transfer knowledge and skills to each other remotely. That's been a big learning curve. But that too has been really beneficial for us, because now as a team, we're stronger, we're healthier, we know how to operate in person, and we also know some good best practices for operating when we can't, you know, nudge the person in the desk next to us and know exactly when we can interrupt them.
That's great. Ursula, I'm curious, like, in terms of your flexibility, has that how has that has it kind of come into sort of more of a standardized pattern where you kind of, you know, where folks have sort of set like their own sort of schedules that are, or I'm just curious about that in terms of coordination, alignment, other factors. when you're taking into account that level of flexibility?
Sure. So a couple of things that we've been trying that have been helping. We're increasingly using the icons on Slack to let folks know where we are, when we're available, and what kind of break we may be taking. You know, if you're just out for a walk, even something as simple as that is a good signal to the rest of the team that if it's not urgent, this person's actually getting a mental break right now. They're there if you need them, but right now they're taking a little time for themselves. Blocking the time on our calendars when we know we have other things. We are making sure we do that for personal matters too. It can be as simple as, you know, I have to make lunch for my kids and this is where I am. We are being flexible in the ways that we organize as a team too. So we have a lot of folks at home who really miss the in-person interaction because again, we were really close-knit team. We did a lot of things together. We spent a lot of time together. And so opening up optional hangouts where it's sort of a standing invite for people to get together. But again, it's flexible, it's optional. No one feels like they're penalized if they can't be there because it turns out that's the only time that you have in the next couple of hours to actually focus on some of the work you need to get done. So, you know, I'd say that we don't always know what each other is doing, but what we are trying to do, and I'd say this is maybe our best question right now, is when do you need this by? Or what's your timeline for this? It's something that we didn't really have to ask as often when we were together, but that's been a really good tool, which is as soon as somebody makes a request in a fast-paced environment, being able to follow up with, okay, great, I can get that to you. What's the deadline? So we've been embracing that more to so that we don't have to know where everybody is at all times.
Mm-hmm.
You know, one thing I would encourage there, and it's something that we've been doing, is actually flipping that around and making it so that the requester indicates the timeline with the request, right? Because really, especially in like the power dynamics of you know, leadership versus staff, it can feel like every request is urgent, right? If the CEO comes in and says, hey, I have a question about this. One of the things I personally have been trying to be more cognizant of is saying explicitly, like, I don't need this done right now. There is time, you know, we can talk about it tomorrow. We can talk about it next week. We can get some time on the calendar. Because what happens with tools like Slack is Slack isn't just a communication medium, it's like a note-taking medium as well, right? We're like whiteboarding in our commentary out into Slack. And then people are wondering, like, do I need to take action on this free expression thought that we're taking? So in my mind, like the onus is always on the requester to say, who, you know, if you don't indicate, you can't be upset with the timeline that the person picked up and ran with.
Yeah. That's good feedback. Hirsch, you had mentioned mandatory days. The next question is you know, what adjustments have you made to help your product teams remain productive and successful? It sounds like that is one thing that you've incorporated. Is that when you do mandatory days, is that for the whole company? Is that like everybody is out at that time? Okay.
Yeah, and you know, there's always going to be like challenges with that, right? If somebody's on the sales team and they're working a deal on the person, you know, like, so you do the best you can, but the intention is, if we have this day, we're explicitly trying to avoid work on that day.
Mm-hmm.
Like anything, but by introducing it as a company holiday, what we're setting a tone for what we want that output to be, what we want to happen on that day. And we also we were pretty explicit, like, we know that the effort that we're putting in right now to like accommodate each other, right? And, you know, Ursula, you were talking about boundaries and how boundaries are different for every person, right? It's not a company boundary, it's a personal boundary. Well, to accommodate a personal boundary, it requires us to stretch in ways that, eventually will lead to everyone burning out. So the point of the holiday and the way that we present it is like, this is a recharge time for the organization, for the entire org. Because if we know we get those times to recharge, then we're going to do better, right? It's like your rest day when you're at the gym, right? It's what you need to be able to recover. But we do that for the whole company. It's not just the product team. A couple things we've seen on the product team itself is like, Ursula was talking about like knowledge transfer and knowledge share. We've been a little more intentional about planning, actually. Whereas before you could walk over, grab, the product manager and developers and say, hey, let's just frame this out really quick before we get into a sprint or before we start working on a feature. You can't do that as easily anymore. So really, like, one of the things we've seen in the data that's been pretty successful, and also I think we're implementing in our team, is just lean into all this tooling that we're paying for, right? We have calendars, like lean into the calendars. Everybody can see everybody else's calendar, like use it. You can see where you are on Slack, like Ursula was saying, like what are the icons, right? Leverage that, and then be overly verbose and overly communicative, because if it feels awkward to you to be that verbose, it probably feels normal for the person receiving that information.
Hersh, I just want to sort of add to the intentional planning effort. Tech teams and product teams are really, I'd say, very well equipped with tools for dealing with situations like this if they're using them. Not just sort of the communication channels, but if you're good at planning, and if you're good at story writing, and if you're good at your scrums and keeping those to the right format, then those are the things that are really helping our team stay productive by adhering to those. Especially when it comes to the different sizes of stories. Because, if you don't know how much time you're going to have to work on something, you need to have a good mix of stories that are going to take you a couple of days and stories that are going to take you a couple of minutes or a couple of hours, where you can pick something that's going to make you feel like, all right, I can actually cross this off and move this forward and unblock somebody. So it's really sort of more important than ever to make sure that whether you're on a week-long sprint or a 2-week sprint in your product development cycle, or however long it is, that you're really clear on, here's what we're trying to achieve during this time. Here are stories of all different shapes and sizes that you can grab and take and move through. Some that require maybe pairing with other people and knowing, all right, we can team up on this because this week is looking good for me, or some that you can do in that one free hour that you find at 8 o'clock.
Yeah, our data totally supports that. We've seen kind of post-COVID cycle time go down, large commits go down, become more granular. We've seen PR review time become tighter. We've seen just like adherence to the ideals of the process as a result of, like, if we take more incremental and granular steps to get to our outcome and start from the very beginning and split things up as we like kind of intend to when we, in our idealized fashion of like small bite-sized chunks, we can be more predictable even though our schedules are all crazy. And what's been really encouraging is that when we looked across our entire customer base and looked at the data absolutely supported that. The companies that are doing the best right now, they took those actions to chunk down their stories, commit more frequently, be more proactive on reviewing code. Cycle times have gone down, throughput has gone up for those companies.
Patty, I'd love your input in terms of also the adjustments that your team has made as well.
Right. Yeah, we had right before the pandemic, we were in the middle of some pretty big feature sets, and to echo Ursula and Hersh, breaking those down. We've been continually refining our processes, but we do a 2-week sprint, and we've adhered to our scrums, our daily scrums, and our planning and backlog grooming. We've gotten a lot better at refining things down into smaller sizes. We're starting to work with shaping now. We're starting to do shaping exercises. People seem to really like that. Getting things, breadboarded and, all those kind of things. But yeah, I think, just encouraging the team to continue to work together and communicate, finding the balance between either a Slack convo or a quick chat on a call, and not having so many meetings where people's calendars are filled. So we have, just a few recurring meetings, and then, if people need to take time during the day, to echo that, they do. But they have been also pulling more off the backlog. More things seem to be getting done faster, and we're getting a little. It seems like we've increased our collaboration on the pull requests and code reviews, and just people jump on stuff to try and help each other out, as they can. And if people get busy and something starts falling, then just somebody says, hey, can you take a look at this? I asked about it yesterday, and somebody will get on there. So it's just trying to, you're just trying to be aware of everybody's new schedule, and we're not all 9 to 5 anymore. So just be aware of that. And surely if you're looking for something, it could be frustrating if somebody's not there, but you just have to be aware that that's unavoidable. And for the most part, we've been able to get around that. I think people have come together and been working together really well.
Yeah, that's great. Ursula, you had mentioned your onboarding, like you have onboarded some new people through this process. Like, how has that changed? I mean, I know you were such a tight company in your little office space at the American Underground, but I'm curious how you, what adjustments you made in terms of that.
So one of the things that I think we discovered we did sort of without knowing in person was, again, verbally transfer a lot of knowledge by working through things in real time. And so something would come up, and then we would talk through like the history of that code or that product or that feature, and address it all as a team. Like, oh yeah, the reason that this is built this way is because of these 3 things, and you need to know this, this, and this. So if somebody's working in a silo, they don't have that context, and it takes them, they can sit there and they could be looking at it for a really long time, and you don't even realize that you have this simple answer to what's going to make everything they're looking at make sense, and they don't yet know to ask. And so those are some of the from an engineering team onboarding challenges we've faced. But then also we've brought on other team members, including members in our sales team. And I think the best onboarding strategy we've had is essentially to have a partner for those new employees, and have someone who is there working side by side with them as much as possible, and pinging them or actually talking to them as they're going through things, ideally as close to the same way that we would in the office as we can. When we talk about like sales or interacting with customers, for us that means we're on the call together, and then we're preparing for the call together. We're debriefing after the call. Now that's a big time commitment for the people who are partnering with the new employees, but we find that it dramatically speeds up their ability to get the answers to the questions that they need to then be contributing on their own and not needing that type of support. It took us a little bit of time to figure that out. And then as soon as we realized, hey, if we carve out the time to literally be there with them through the thing that they're working through, it's just going to speed up their ramp up that much more.
Yeah, and I'm imagining that also helps them feel less isolated, onboarding remotely, and that having a partner to kind of work with without being left to kind of fend for themselves. I can imagine that actually, really, really helps that process.
Yeah, it has. I think even now with some team members who have only been with us for a couple of months, I still, in our regular check-ins, want to make sure that they're not suffering through something without communicating it, and making sure that they always feel like the challenges that they're having, or if they feel like they're spinning on something and they're not making progress, that we don't see that as a bad thing to bring up. It's a good thing. Let's address it, and we want to help them move through it. So that's actually that frequent check-in is something that we've seen as an interesting request from the women in our network. So I mentioned that we help women succeed at work. So we're helping our team figure this out, and then we're helping millions of women try to deal with the new reality, and we're helping thousands of companies who are trying to figure out what are the best practices for doing all these things and how we can get through this. So we approach it from a lot of different angles, and the check-ins are a funny, sort of, they can be a little bit confusing to people, where they're like, people don't really have the same amount of time to dedicate. They don't want to have as many meetings, but at the same time, they value the quick check-in more than ever. And so we actually have some content on that. I'd be happy to share some research we've done to anyone who's listening that goes through the best practices for those check-ins that make people feel like they're supported and it's not actually a drain on their time or feeling like something that's stressful for them, because getting that right is a really helpful tool.
That'd be great. It would be awesome to get that research or that the resources that you have. That's great. Moving on to like, I know we've touched upon things that you're doing, but what investment tools, professional development, processes, methods are most important for the health and well-being of your product teams today? Hersh, I'll figure that out, or Patty, if you want to pick that up.
Yeah, I mean, we have a product team of one person. For us, we're small, so we're startup. He's been able to take some time off. He's been able to take time to do some professional development stuff specific to product management. As a development team, we try to support him. Fortunately for us, his background is in development, so he understands where we're coming from, so that helps a lot as well. So we try to work with him, and he almost feels like he's part of the development team. We've kind of taken him in, but he also, has to work with our customers, work with sales and marketing, and, wear many hats. And so, we're just trying to keep the lines of communication open. And when we talk about new features or talk about things, what we can do to support him. So, it also helps if we try to think of things from a product standpoint and not just, solely focused on the development cycle of I'm just building this thing, so it's kind of helped the team to start asking things like, why are we building this? What are we solving with this? What is the customer really looking for? And he can give us that information. And so, we're trying to be there for him to help him build, what the customers need and help him build what sales needs to sell the product. So, it's been, and he started basically right before the holidays last year. So we had only been in the office for a couple months, and, now we're all remote. So it's just trying to, we're on Slack every day. I think like most of us are just keeping that going, but yeah, just trying to be there. Yeah. I mean, it's like I said, I've been at places where you would have like dev versus sales or, different factions butting heads, like, we don't want to do this, or why are we doing this, or you need to do this, it doesn't make sense. And so fortunately here we're such a small team, and, everybody just personality wise gets along well. We can joke and have fun, but, when it's time to get serious, we can. And so I think that kind of helps the collaboration across the board. So if somebody in a customer success says, hey, the customer's asking about this, our product, I can talk to the customer, he can come talk to us, explain it. We're all trying to do the right thing. And, it's really nice not to have a lot of those frustrating headbutting types of incidents going on. We're pretty collaborative.
Great.
Actually, Patty, you said something that I wanted to sort of emphasize or provide our perspective on, which is, I'd say that the most valuable investment we're making right now to keep our team happy is in investing in the product itself. Mm-hmm. So many of our products need to change because of what's happened. Mm-hmm. And as product people, we love to feel like we're making our product more relevant, more effective, especially for a company like ours that is mission driven and it's focused on change. Mm-hmm. our team is happiest when we're building things that we know our users and our customers need. And right now their needs are new, they're fresh, they're different, and we get to sort of innovate around that. And I'd say that making sure that we're embracing all of the new needs instead of just continuing on the path that we set out before all of this started is one of the biggest investments that we've made in our team's happiness. You know, listening again to all of these important stakeholders in our business to understand what is the future of our product and what is the future of our mission and how is it different now. So that's a little bit of what you're saying and a little bit different. But I think so many product teams are just energized when they have those new needs and they have those new demands. And so it can be a really exciting time to be building things.
Yep. And I'll agree with that because I mentioned earlier, we had some core features we were working on when we all ended up working from home and our customers had to work from home. There were a couple new things we had to put in to support them. And so, you know, we had to reprioritize, but as new features, developers love to work on new features. It's fun to get that feedback. Like, here's the thing that they need. How do we get that for them, build it and get it out there, you know? So yes, you are right.
You know, one thing that I think about a lot is that all of the problems we're dealing with in COVID are not new problems. They're just problems exacerbated by the circumstances. Patty, you were touching on like dev versus sales and butting heads and things like that. All of that fundamentally comes down to opacity, right? The biggest challenge in engineering and product is that it's an insular, opaque organization that's often held by the rest of the company kind of at arm's length. But the reasons for that really come down to a lack of visibility in both directions, a lack of mutual accountability. And so leaning back into these fundamental truths about why a company got started is really important, as well as leaning into processes that kind of reduce noise as well in the fundamental like day-to-day workings of a team. So some of the things we try to do that are really important is like we don't like it's kind of interesting to think about, like we don't have a need to make a change to spend more time with customers or like reflect on you know what new things we need to build, because that's like ingrained in our philosophy. We always have dev and product in front of customers. That's a perpetual thing, but we're doing that even more, and we're even going down to like map out to say, you know, which personas have talked to which other personas, and how are we making sure that we're not just hitting up our favorite customers, we're hitting up every profile, and we're doing that continuously and repeatedly. And how are we both enabling the developers to get like firsthand experience with the customers so that they can both see the enthusiasm and excitement that the customers are receiving the product with, as well as feel the pain that the customer is feeling when they're trying to use the product. I mean, that pays off incredibly, right? It's, you know, in both ways. Like, you want to get your team as energized as possible, have them hear firsthand from the customer how much they love the product. If you want that thing fixed that never seems to get fixed, have them watch the customer try to use the broken thing. Both of those things pay off in spades. But then the flip side of that is, you know, especially if you think about like any organization, but in particular in startups, like, everything's always on fire, right? That's kind of the general philosophy of a startup. And early on, it might feel like every fire needs to be put out immediately. But honestly, like, some fires can burn and linger. And so one of the things that we've put in place recently is that when the communication medium is Slack or some kind of chat, everything feels kind of equally important. And so, like, if you have a place where you post bugs and you put all your bugs there, well, which one should I work on, right? Should I work on all of them as P1? How do I classify them? Even if I classify it as less important, it might still feel important because it's intermingled with everything else. So taking some of those triage steps and moving them into isolated places where you have like kind of a triage team that sits there and says, okay, what is the priority here? When do we need to handle it? And then only when it escalates to a certain level pushing it out into the main like interruptions channel. And then tracking that back to the rest of the org to say, okay, here's how we're going to handle these requests, and here's when they're going to interrupt, and here's when they're going to be scheduled, so that there is that opacity gets removed and there's a lot of visibility inside the org. Those kinds of investments are the investments that have paid off the most, because it helps people kind of titrate the feedback to understand, when do I need to drop everything? When can I keep focusing on what I'm doing? What are the outputs of what I'm doing? Does anyone even care that I built this thing? That communication, that investment in that communication, that's really key. It was things we needed to do before, right? But
yeah.
Now we have an excuse to double down and focus on it, so take advantage of that excuse.
That's great. Just kind of, I mean, you all have brought up some great different ways that you're adjusting, but also things that are just best practices, and then how do you continuing to incorporate them sort of in this time. What other advice do you have for other founders, product managers, to help them keep their teams motivated and productive?
I'm happy to jump in. We're, as Hirsch mentioned, with the extended timeline of this, I think this is going to be increasingly important, but I know we're trying to think of more creative ways to export the culture from inside the company to this new remote situation. And we've all been dabbling in that, whether it's through, those recurring Zoom meetings that when we would typically have conversations or activities that we can do, ways to stay connected. But I think it's going to be important to make sure that some of that's online, some of it's offline, things that you're doing to actually be a presence in their home and be supportive in like a physical way, to actually show that, like, I don't know, if you're a big snack culture, send snacks to the houses of the employees and remind them of, like, oh yeah, we all love to eat these gummy bears and they're on the desks and we have them here too. Little things like that can go a long way. Companies are doing fun things like drive-through Halloween events, but you could do this at any time. They're already starting, the big companies are starting to plan for the fall in that way, where they're like, we're going to do some big thing and we're going to have the employees come through. Well, smaller companies, we can do that on a small scale. I mean, I'm sure a lot of us see in our neighborhoods the teachers going by and honking for the kids when they graduate from programs and things like that. Well, those are fun ways for teammates to stay in touch too, and actually see each other if they're still doing social distancing. We have some companies doing social distance gatherings in parks, and I think spending some time identifying what it was that made your culture fun or unique. What were the aspects? Were you, I said a snack culture, but maybe you're the opposite. Maybe you're a health-focused company. What were the things that were the fun activities, and how do you encourage them and participate in them in this new remote reality? I think that's going to be important for reminding your team of how you are all unique.
Yeah, I think those are some really good points, and thinking beyond just the production of product and just like the tools, like that. There's way more to the product team communications in terms of culture that need to be continued on. Those are great points, Ursula.
Yeah, actually, we had a focus group last night, and I hadn't thought of this in advance, but one of the women said, we didn't get our cocktail kits. Where's the fun thing that we can all do on the screen? And I thought, oh, that's a fun idea. I don't think it's probably not legal, but it was a good idea to think about, like, what are those little things for the important times where you need to innovate or you need to have fun, and you don't want to do the just conversational icebreaker. You've got to help the teams relax together.
Yeah, we do a virtual happy hour scheduled where it's towards the end of the day, and basically everybody's invited, get everybody on there. You don't have to drink, but it's non-work conversations. We've done things like games, shared games. We've done GeoGuessr and try to figure out where you're at on the map, on the Google Maps, and just anything that's not work related, and social discussions, and just try to have a little break there and do something fun.
The thing I would encourage is just change it up. We've done all of these things kind of, and there's the thing that's been consistent is there's a lot of like excitement at the beginning, and then it trails off over time into participation and enthusiasm. And it's just because you have your boundaries, you have your schedules, you have your competing interests. You might just be tired of being on video, right? Like, hey, let's get out of the doldrums of being on Zoom all day by adding another hour on Zoom. It works, and then you need to take a break, and then you do something else, and then it works. And so I think one signal that you don't want to spend is like, hey, we put this thing on the calendar, and we put it on the calendar for like 9 months, right? Recurring meeting for 9 months. And then it just becomes an obligation. So just, we recently swapped out a bunch of stuff, and we're figuring out what's our next thing, we're going to do with the team for that exact reason, because you don't want it to start to feel like an obligation.
Yep.
Yeah, Hirsch, I think that's great feedback. And I think novelty is something that, when this first hit, everybody was, jumping on, but you can get burned out, and that kind of leads, how are we maintaining that motivation to keep people, engaged, and switching it out, being creative in different ways. But I also love, what Ursula says is, having, I think this is true for both, product, direction as well as culture, is just having that clear vision of what the values are, and what you're working toward, and being able to incorporate and innovate different activity levels around that. That seems to make a lot of sense. We've got a little bit of time. I've got some questions that came in from some of our registrants. So I'll ask some of them before we kind of tie up. One of the questions that came in was, how do you cultivate and maintain a culture that promotes independence, efficiency, and responsibility in the work among employees working remotely?
So I'm happy to give my perspective on that. I think it's actually, for us at least, it's the same as we would in person, which is making sure that expectations are clear, and that there is measurement and ongoing evaluation of performance. So, people feel sort of most accountable and responsible for things when they know exactly what they're working on, what they're trying to achieve, and they understand how they're going to be measured. And so if you have those ingredients, it's much easier to have a conversation about, why things aren't getting done, because you have that clear, like, this is what you're responsible for, and this is what we expected, and this is what happened. And so I think we're doing some research right now on how that's changed your clarity on your work since you've been remote. Or another way that we're looking at it with women in our network is, do they feel like their work gets the same visibility? So if you're doing a lot of stuff and you feel like nobody really sees what you're doing, that's sort of the flip side of this, which you could have a bunch of accountable, responsible employees who feel like autonomy because they know what to do and how they're being measured. But if somebody isn't evaluating that and giving feedback and acknowledging it, then that also leads to employees sort of not feeling that way anymore, and losing the the sort of the benefits of being a culture that measures what you're doing. So I would say that just like for tech teams, it's really important to be adhering to the principles of things like Scrum and planning. Just in general, from a management perspective, if you want your employees to feel independent, autonomous, and to really be taking their own initiative, you need to make sure it's clear what you want them to work on and how their performance will be measured.
I think that's a critical point, Ursula. I think there's one thing I would add to it is, can you help your employees map their outcomes to the key measurements of the business itself? And so if one of the really critical like infrastructure things you should do as a leadership team is to say, okay, here are, the key metrics for the business. And here are how each of the functional areas of the business are contributing to them. And here are how each of the roles and individuals are contributing to those second order metrics, so that at any time somebody can say, like, when I perform here, when I am successful here, that makes the business successful on these vectors. And so there's a clear line to value generated for the overall organization. And what I see generally is that it creates an organization of folks who are highly invested in the outcome of the organization itself. And then they start thinking of themselves as part of a community building together rather than optimizing their individual performance.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And kind of tying in some of the other things we talked about, we're a collaborative team, right? And you mentioned getting people in front of customers and we have done that. We've gotten devs have been on calls with customers for a feature they're working on or for a customization, so they get that firsthand understanding of what's going on. With new employees, we try to put them with our sales team when they're doing demos, so they see how the product's being sold. They see the product in use. That's their kind of some of their first exposure to how it works. Not many people are going to know law practices coming in just as a developer, so I'm trying to understand how a law firm works and what they go through, so getting some of that understanding. But yeah, it's like they get to kind of see the big picture and see what they're going to be a part of, and then they can see, oh, this feature I worked on is now being used here by this customer, and they're happy, and now we're getting feedback, and great, now we can see how we can improve it and things like that. So yeah.
From a small company's perspective, I think it can be challenging when let's say you've set goals and milestones for the next 6 months. And the truth is, not, especially for small companies, and I've worked for big companies where this happens too, there's always a darling initiative. There's always something that is the top priority, that's really the thing that you need to accomplish more than anything else. And depending on all of the different aspects of your business that you're supporting, sometimes it's rotating pretty quickly, where you're like, okay, now the sales team is really in the spotlight. Now the product team is really in the spotlight. Now the editorial team is really in the spotlight, and it can rotate. But I think it's really important to remember that when all eyes are on sort of that top and leading initiative, we have to find ways to continue to celebrate the wins in the other areas of the business. Because just because they're not the most pressing priority doesn't mean that a lot of work isn't going into them, and that those employees need motivation too. And yes, it's all tied together, but I think that as this is something that companies can often fall short on, which is finding ways to celebrate wins in areas of the business that aren't the first thing on the roadmap.
Right. Yep.
That's great. We're getting close to the end of the hour. I don't know if y'all have one last thought that you want to share with our audience before we wrap it up, but I did want to kind of thank you all for this great conversation. You've provided me with some really interesting insights, and I hope that other folks have gained some insights and some strategies in terms of working with their product teams. I'll just kind of leave it out to the group if there's any sort of final thoughts that you want to leave the audience with.
Thank you for having us, Emily. This has been fun. My final thought would just be that I think there aren't too many companies that are too big to do this. So I would encourage everyone who's on the call to spend time talking to and understanding each individual employee's reality right now. You know, it's great to send a survey to your employees and collect the aggregated data. We do a lot of surveying. It's super valuable. I'm a huge proponent of surveys. But in times like these, it's also really important to individually understand circumstances, whether you're making a decision about, should I reopen the office? When should we come back? Yes, you can send out a survey and find out comfort levels, but talk to each individual employee, because you'll actually find that you're going to come up with ideas that maybe you hadn't thought of for what you were trying to address from the combination of individual experiences that you're hearing. So I think that listening to your employees is important right now. It shouldn't just be through big, broad surveys. It needs to be one-on-one.
Yeah, I would agree with that, because we've started, we've done one-on-ones on and off, but our CEO has been doing that during the pandemic, and so everybody from the managers all the way down, one-on-ones. And we just did after the first of the year, we did a big survey, and then every individual has now done a one-on-one with the CEO, to talk about the survey and expectations and what they want going forward for the next half of the year, and what the company is going to be doing and trying to do that. So I do think that's important, because you're right. It's it's easy to think that we're all communicating and talking to each other, but once you get that one-on-one you kind of shut everything else out and okay, let me lay everything out, and if you can feel comfortable enough to share, and you're not trying to hide anything, then I think that helps the company as a whole to keep everybody happy and keep things moving.
Yeah,
I was literally going to say almost verbatim the exact same thing. Like as leaders, the onus is on you to always be listening, and you have to make space to interface with your people one-on-one and listen. All the things we talked about today, all the tactics, they're all just that, tactics. It's up to you to figure out what's appropriate for your company and listen to your people to understand, is that the right thing to help them be successful? And that right thing that's successful right now won't be the right thing that's successful in 2 months. And so you can't just listen once, right? You have to listen continuously. I just would add one more thing. When we entered into this mess, we all kind of generally entered with this vague idea that there was a midsummer kind of aspirational return to normalcy, right? So everyone jumped in full bore, rolled their sleeves up, we're gonna get through this, rah rah, whatever. And now you get to this ever slipping end date, right? And this is where you're really going to see the mental health fatigue set in. It starts now. Everything to date has just been the precursor of what is to come. So now the weariness starts. Now the exhaustion starts. Now the burnout starts. So you have to be actively fighting it, not just relying on the enthusiasm of we're all in this together. So it goes back to what everyone's been saying just now, is just active listening, be proactive, get out there, talk to everybody, and do your best.
that's great. And we're going to end it on there. I want to thank you all again for this very important conversation. And obviously it's an ongoing thing, just like Hirsch has said. If other folks are on the call, are looking for help in terms of optimizing their product teams, please feel free to reach out to me at emily@thoughtpot.com. I would love to we would love to engage or help out in any way that we can. We'll be sending out resources that we'll collect from this, that we'll send out, as well as, we have a bunch of resources also on our thoughtbot.com, so please feel free to kind of look at that as well. But thank you all for giving us your lunch hour at this time, and I hope that this has all been helpful to everybody who has joined. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.